Hi there, and welcome to People Soup. Real conversations about work, leadership, and being human, grounded in behavioural science with practical ideas you can actually use. I'm Ross McIntosh, and in this episode I'm joined by Dr Rose Aghdami, chartered coaching psychologist and author of How to Fuel Your Resilience. Rose's work explores what helps us build resilience in a way that's both practical and sustainable. But as you'll hear, this isn't simply a conversation about becoming more resilient. It's also a conversation about what resilience isn't. We explore why the word can provoke such strong reactions, how work can sometimes undermine our well-being, and why thriving starts with staying human rather than simply pushing through. Along the way, Rose shares the client conversation that changed the direction of her career, introduces her fuel model, and offers some thoughtful, practical ideas for protecting our energy and responding more intentionally when life and work become challenging. So get a brew on and let's explore. And I wonder, Rose, if you just wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about your career, just so we can get to know you a bit.
Yeah, sure. So originally I was very interested in international affairs, languages, cross-cultural studies and so on. But I picked up a book in a bookshop, Aston University bookshop to be very precise. And it was the first psychology book I'd ever picked up. And I was absolutely transfixed. And I decided that this is what I really want to study. So I switched courses at university from international studies to psychology and never looked back, really. I've always been fascinated by anything to do with psychology. It's so varied, so intriguing, and I've found my career very, very rewarding. So I started off with children and young people, working in Switzerland, actually, as a psychologist after all the necessary degrees and training. Then came back to the UK and worked in adult mental health there for a short while in the NHS and then in the private sector. And that took me from specialising in trauma and then specialising in anxiety and anxiety-related areas, OCD, panic attacks, to thinking about how could I work in a more preventative way against extreme exhaustion, stress, anxiety, burnout, and discovered that resilience was the area that kept appearing. And so, again, looking at other people's research on resilience then, I worked out what the 4 key elements were out of many, but distilling them into a simple to remember model, which became FUEL, F-U-E-L, was important to me so that it would be simple to remember, straightforward to apply once people had learned the skills that were relevant, and helpful. So I started to take this model out into organizations and got a good feedback, good reception with that. And I also started to build it into my psychology sessions towards the end of a course of sessions when we'd started to think about relapse prevention and what skills they might take away with them into their lives again. And that also got a good reception and people found that very helpful. So then I started to focus more on the FUEL model. And here we are. I wrote the book and started to spread the word of the FUEL model. And so far, I gather from people's feedback, it's a helpful model that people find pretty straightforward to use.
Great stuff. Thank you, Rose. I wonder if I could delve a bit deeper into some of that, because we'll come back to the FUEL model, which I love, in a moment. But I'm so curious. Thinking about you at Aston University bookshop, picking up one psychology book. Can you remember what it was? It shows the power of books.
It does, actually. You're right. I can remember. I went to Birmingham University, but of course Aston University and the bookshop is fairly close to the city centre. It was I'm OK, You're OK, the classic. And it just opened up this world of being aware of that there is an inner world. I think people weren't so familiar with that idea. This was just something new, and there were no GCSEs or A-levels in psychology then. People started studying psychology at university. So it was a fairly newish subject to be able to study at university. But that was the book that started my path.
So that was a pivotal moment, just led by an instant in a bookshop. I wonder if there's been any other pivotal moments in your career that you could share with us.
Yes, this marks the tipping point really into the focus on professional well-being. And it was when I was in the clinic I mentioned in Windsor, and I had a client there who I know is happy for me to share this story because I've discussed it with her in the past. And she was sent along, which is not usually a very good start if somebody's sent along by their manager to go and see a psychologist. But there she was. She attended the first session, and we were talking about what she was hoping to get from the course of sessions and how she'd experienced the previous few months or longer and why she'd been sent along. And it had to do with lots of things, really. Relationships with other colleagues, communication, pressure at work, exhaustion. And she was really not feeling well. And she said to me, do many people come with the same sort of situation, that they have been struggling at work and then it shows itself in not sleeping, mood swings, not feeling good. And I said, well, it's not unusual that people come and speak to me about pressure at work and how it affects them. Oh, she said, so you mean work can make you ill? And I thought, gosh, in some situations that is absolutely spot on. Given how much time, effort, energy we devote to work, given how much time we spend with our colleagues, focusing on our projects and expectations and deadlines and so on, I thought that's a really important comment that she's made here. And I thought, gosh, this needs investigating. This needs checking out. Yes, perhaps work does make you ill. And I wonder then whether the opposite could be true. Perhaps work can enhance quality of life. Perhaps you can have fun at work. Perhaps you can build really solid, meaningful working relationships with people. And so the resilience area developed because I believe, resilience is about thriving, not just surviving. We can help people to live a great life, not just a good life.
I love that. Just such a profound sentence and what that ignited in you. I want to talk to you about the R word, resilience, because sometimes I find organizations have an extreme allergic reaction to the word resilience. I quite like the word personally, but I sometimes get eye rolls and a comment to the effect of, so instead of me doing the work of 1.5 people, you want me to do the work of 3 people and not fall over. Is that what you're saying? I wonder if you've come across anything similar to that.
I certainly have. Yeah, resilience can sometimes get a really bad press in organizations, with individuals. I've heard people saying, Rose, I can't hear that word. I cannot hear it. As soon as it crosses my path, I switch off. Because for the person I'm thinking of, she said, it just reminds me of people expecting me to keep on keeping on regardless of what was happening, whether that was at home, whether that was in college, whether that was in my early jobs. People just expect me to be tough as nails and not feel anything and do, the work of 3 people and not complain and not point out that this is unrealistic. So yes, I think it has become, or had become, a way of some employers pathologizing the individual, saying, if only you were more resilient, you'd be able to manage this. You're the problem. Just become more resilient, come back, and then you'll be able to do the work of 3 people. And that's no good for the individual to feel there's something wrong with them because they're not able to manage an unrealistic workload. But it could feel like that. It could feel as though there was something wrong with them. And so yes, resilience means so many different things to different people that it's important, I think, to really pinpoint what it is that we mean by resilience. What I mean by it is it's a way of coping well and recognizing and coping well with stress and adversity. But I don't see it as the version of resilience that we've just been discussing, the sort of keeping on or pushing through, staying strong regardless. I see it as a way of admiring our capacity to manage well when we're challenged, as well as, and that's the important bit, it's not instead of, but as well as embracing the range of human emotions that we feel and staying human. I think resilience starts with staying human, really, that we acknowledge that we have emotions that run alongside these challenges. We might feel scared, we might feel overwhelmed, we might feel worried, we might have self-doubt, insecurities, we might feel vulnerable, at the same time as recognizing that actually we do have skills we can draw on. We can take this step by step. We can look at things in a different way. So it's that capacity to hold two in mind, that yes, we can feel scared and worried and overwhelmed, as well as remembering that we've done something a bit like this before and it eventually worked out well or well enough, and perhaps we can do that again.
Gosh, thank you, Rose, for expressing that with such clarity, because I absolutely agree. And on my platform here, I'd really like to elevate your definition of resilience, because I do think there are people out there promoting the alternative.
Yeah, and, we can power through up to a certain point, but it's not sustainable. And so that's where I think that the approach I've just described, which is keeping the balance there between the human and the ability to face and deal well with challenges, I think it's important to recognize that is a sustainable type of resilience. We want to have a resilient mindset and a resilient lifestyle to sustain resilience, so that it's part of the way we approach things. It's a perspective that then translates into particular choices of decisions and behaviors. But it's not meant to be, I don't believe, a sort of sprint with no end. You can sprint for 50 meters maybe, and that's not going to be too harmful if you're fit enough. But to expect just to keep that momentum going and at the expense of your humanness, then I think that's unrealistic.
Absolutely. Which I think leads us nicely into your Fuel Your Resilience model. And I wonder if you could give us a headline version of the model Fuel.
I will try and be succinct. So F is for flexibility. And that is really key. Rigidity is the enemy of resilience, really. So we need flexibility in my view, 4 areas. Not just my view, according to the research. We need flexibility in our thoughts. So we need to recognize that there are different ways of seeing things and that our thoughts will guide our feelings. So if we believe we can't possibly do something, if that's our thought, as human beings, we respond to thoughts as if they're facts. So, that is, of course, going to lead us to feel daunted and overwhelmed. So we need that openness to consider different perspectives. So we need flexibility in thoughts, in feelings, so that we don't perhaps habitually feel panic in front of maybe a difficult work meeting. We need, again, to be open to feeling confident, perhaps even intrigued, curious. We need flexibility in our behavior. Nothing changes unless we translate the thoughts and the feelings into different actions. And the 4th, I believe, is a pretty important one. We need flexibility in the way we see ourselves, in our sense of self-identity. If we continue to think of ourselves in perhaps our old roles, I've always been a worrier, let's say, then that will override all sorts of good strategies and techniques that could help to shift that. Yes, that's all very well, but I've always been a worrier. We can put that into the past, say I used to be a worrier, but now I'm interested to meet new people, for example, or see how I get on with a difficult conversation at work. I'm curious about that. I'm somebody who takes that on as a challenge rather than as something overwhelming and daunting. So we need to be open to that flexibility in our self-identity. So that's F in a nutshell. U is about using your resources. And we all have internal resources and there are always external resources. So it's about being open to tapping into both and drawing on them. The internal resources are things like skills, experiences we've had, personal qualities, strengths, and we carry those with us all the time. External resources are resources such as friends, our support network, basically. Friends, family, perhaps professionals, GP, therapists, psychologists, books, solidly researched books, Now, some people find it very difficult to ask for support. So they typically might find it difficult to ask their support network, other people, to help them. So coming on to E, which is one of my favorites, I would say, E for energize. It's about doing more that energizes and recharges you and less of what drains you. So it's about, first of all, identifying, well, what is it that leaves me energized? Maybe we have activities, people in our lives who drain us. Is it possible, might not be possible to eliminate it completely from our lives, but can we reduce time spent either on those tasks or with those people, for example? How can we build in more activities that energize us? Because if you think of perhaps the image of a high-performance car, we have to make time to refuel that. It's no good to anybody without fuel. We have to prioritize the refueling and the maintenance. And it's the same with us as human beings. We're, with this wonderful system, but we have to make time to recharge and refuel our system. Not just psychologically. We might need physical energy. We might need psychological energy. We might need emotional energy. So it's about recognizing that really, without making time to do this, we're just running on empty, and it's not really good to anybody, let alone to ourselves. So we have come now to L, of fuel, and L is for locate your control. It's about noticing where we can take charge and where we can't. So it's about what's called the locus of control, which is quite simply talking about where we locate control compared to ourselves in life. Control of our experiences, not control of other people. Sometimes we can control or at least influence circumstances, but it's about recognizing what we can take charge of, what we can't. We can always take charge of our own response to things, and it's about strengthening that capacity to influence how we experience things. There are two types of locus of control. One is internal locus of control, where we believe we can take charge of our experiences and our responses to things. And then there's an external locus of control. These are 2 points on a continuum, and we're all somewhere along that continuum. But if a person has an external locus of control, they can feel rather like a leaf in the wind. Somebody says something and they blow one way. Something else happens out there, or somebody else says the opposite thing, and they blow the other way. And so it doesn't feel very grounded. It feels very random. And so people feel quite helpless. And the sort of phrases that give away if a person has an external locus of control, things like, I have no choice, there's nothing I can do. And to try and strengthen the internal, there are two good questions. One is, in a situation where a person's not feeling comfortable for whatever reason, what options do I have? I would say there are almost always options. Doing nothing is an option. And then the second question is, so which option will I take as my first right next step? It's not could I take or might I take, it's which option will I take? Back to the point of, actions having to occur for a positive change to happen. So that's my overview of the fuel model.
Thank you, Rose, for taking us on that little tour. Bravo. I can really see the evidence base behind it. I can see research on leisure time recovery. I can see research on compassion-focused therapy. I can also see acceptance and commitment therapy there. And I just want to zoom in on the F in your model, the flexibility, and wonder if you can help us see why flexibility is so important when life or work gets difficult.
Yeah. Well, habits can form. Positive habits or harmful habits can form. Emotional habits can form. That heart sink on a Sunday evening, waking up on Monday morning, feeling uninspired, reluctant, resentful even. And unless these are identified and examined really and investigated, if they stay put, then that lifestyle will continue. That a person finds themselves in a job that they no longer feel interested in, no longer feel excited by, no longer like. The values may be at odds with their own. And that's enormously difficult to live with in any situation, actually, in any type of relationship, a friend, a partner, a working relationship. If values are at odds with one's own, very difficult to live with that in a sustained manner. I don't think it is sustainable in a healthy way. So flexibility on all those points is something that will help a person to feel more able, more in charge, more powerful in a good way in terms of being able to shape their experience. Having the flexibility of the thoughts, the self-identity, the emotions, being open to those. My approach is at its core about authenticity and having personal integrity with ourselves. I think of all relationships in life, our relationship with ourselves is the main one. It underpins all others. And so flexibility is crucial for us to be able to nurture that relationship with ourselves, make sure that we are living true to our values, make sure that we are being loyal to ourselves, caring of ourselves, compassionate to ourselves, understanding, and acting accordingly. And that could mean doing all sorts of things, whether it's thinking, feeling, behaving, that we've never done before. So that could be quite scary because, we as human beings love predictability, familiarity, but, it might mean that we need to seriously consider stepping out of a situation or of a behavioral habit, something like that, into a situation which is uncertain and unpredictable. That's very difficult for us to do. And hence the flexibility being very key to resilience, in my view.
Absolutely. Thank you. One thing that particularly strikes me is around energy. What are some of the warning signs that we're running on empty and pretending we're fine?
Yeah, well, I think it's when you start noticing that perhaps it's difficult to focus on things. It's difficult to think clearly about things. You might notice that you are making decisions that aren't your best decisions. So it appears that you're functioning, but actually when you take a step back, or even in the moment, you realize that I'm not at my best here. I'm surviving. I'm turning up at work each day. I'm getting through the day. I'm ticking off my to-do list, but I'm not thriving here. This is not at my best. People can go one out of two ways, really. They can either sort of find ways of distancing themselves, so turning up a bit late and just wanting to leave. I've heard about this where there's a really strong draw to leaving the workplace, leave early, just cutting the day short as a sort of survival strategy, really. Or people work even harder. So they put more and more hours in to trying to get through the to-do list. And because they're not working as efficiently as usual, it takes them longer and it takes more energy and time and effort and emotion to get through. So people will either feel that draw to be distanced or they will engage even more in the tasks. People can become rather easily irritated, which I have discovered when I've asked people that question. Do you feel more easily irritated? Yeah, no, of course not. No, what are you suggesting? So that's my answer. So that sort of snapping at people who don't really deserve it. I think we can all notice that when we're feeling low on resilience, we're feeling a bit more vulnerable, that can happen. Often it's with those people who are closest to you, where you believe that the relationships are so solid they can take a bruise or two now and then. And if that's out of character, which it is for many people, that's something to notice and pick up on and think, what's going on here? Is my resilience low? Do I need to recharge? Do I need to use the fuel model to strengthen my resilience again?
So it takes some self-awareness to realize this is happening to ourselves.
Other people are sometimes very good at mentioning it. So if you have people in your life who would mention it, then you may hear it from them first before you notice it yourself. But self-awareness is very helpful, yes.
Yeah. Do you think there's shame in seeking help?
Definitely for some people there is. Yeah, for some people it's very, very difficult. For others, not so, because perhaps they have discovered that, by being open about their neediness, people tend to flock. There's a phrase, isn't there? How does it go? The squeaky wheel gets the oil. So sometimes when people are comfortable with being needy, because perhaps they've grown up with the belief that it's okay to ask for help, and if you ask for help, you'll get it, they will get help generally. People do generally offer to help. We like helping others within reason, And then the shame of somebody who's not used to that message might be carrying the opposite belief that if I have to ask for help, it means I'm weak. It means I'm failing. They would find it very difficult to ask, and at the same time, perhaps be quite envious of those other people who are receiving the help. Because very often people won't necessarily offer to help because they won't know what's going on. The people who find it difficult to ask for help may be the same ones who appear to be coping very well on the surface. But underneath, they're feeling exhausted, overwhelmed, running on empty. So, this is where the loyalty to oneself comes into it, the relationship to oneself being so important, to be self-respectful, to be loyal to oneself, to be aware of what's going on in order to understand that the shame is probably misplaced.
Now, Rose, I've got a People Soup question that I ask every guest, and that's about your walk-on music. A song that would announce your arrival in a room, and why?
I love that question. It's such an interesting concept to think of having walk-on music. Well, there's a song that I particularly like, and when I go locally in the summer evenings, there's a regular lovely singer on a terrace, and he sings this song quite regularly, and if he sees me there, he sings it for me. So it's sort of, in a way, my song. But I was thinking, why do I like this song so much? And the song is Wonderful Life by Black. But the lyrics are quite interesting. They're not all about life being wonderful, because the writer, who was Colin Verncombe, he'd had a terrible period in his life just before he wrote this song, Wonderful Life. All sorts of things had happened. And, some of the lyrics are things like, here I am on my own again, and this sort of thing. And when I was looking into, the lyrics and why was it, trying to understand why I like this song, I realized that he'd actually written it as an ironic statement of life. And I thought, actually, that's quite profound, really, to feel that there's this potential for life to be wonderful. He wasn't experiencing it like that when he wrote the song. But the potential is there for life to be wonderful. And that sort of resonated, I suppose, with my whole interest in resilience and overcoming adversity. And I like the tune, and I like the backstory to the song, that even when life is very challenging, there is this awareness, I think, in us that life can be wonderful. But I do think we have to look for it. I think I don't like this to sound like an overgeneralization, because it has its limits. But I think to a certain extent, happiness is a choice. To a certain extent, there are situations that happen, of course, where that would not be possible to choose to be happy in those dire situations. But when we're not experiencing such extreme distress, then I believe that we can choose intentionally to make changes, to make our life a good life, and if it's already a good life, a great life. And so the notion that the song offers that awareness that life can be very difficult, but also life could be very wonderful, is something that sort of sums my own approach, my own mindset up, really.
Oh, super. Thank you. Thank you so much, Rose. And I've got a lyric coming into my head. I don't know whether this is right. I'm a bit rusty. No need to run and hide.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So we're not suggesting avoidance.
Exactly. Yes, that is part of the song. And I like that too, because, the definition of resilience includes that we have to be able to face adversity in order then to deal with it well and not avoid. And we don't need to avoid it because we can develop the skills to deal with it at least well enough.
Now, Rose, you've given us so many insights and tips, but I wonder if there was one final takeaway you might have for the listener, a small thing that they could do this week to start fueling their resilience.
Yeah. We've spoken quite a lot about energy, and I think that's probably relevant because it's so important in all of this. And I would suggest that people notice that it can be helpful to respect and nurture your energy, just as we respect and try and manage our time. I think that's a very familiar concept, isn't it? To manage our time well, because we recognise it's a limited resource and we need to make the most of it. But I would suggest for people to transfer that idea to include managing our energy. So one step there is to notice what sort of energy you might be needy of. I think we can probably all do with more energy in some area or another at any time. So, is it emotional energy you need right now? Is it physical energy? Is it cognitive energy? What sort of energy could you benefit from having more of right now? That's one question. Recognize that we can have a sort of energy audit or an energy account, a bit like a bank account. When we use up energy of any type, the account drops. Just like money, we have to put more in order then to be able to use it again. So think of energy as being something like an energy account. If we use it, we have to top it up again. And that's by doing those re-energizing activities or taking time in a way that energizes us. So we have to make time for that. And another step is to think about where is our energy being directed right now? What's taking up the energy? And then that could be a list, and then you draw a circle. And anything that you can control goes within the circle or have an influence on. Anything you can't control goes outside the circle. So, I know how easy it is to use up energy complaining about the English weather, for example, and you can't do anything about that. Well, in most places in the world, there will be times when you think, it's so annoying that today turns out to be grey or cold or whatever it is. But that fits outside the circle. But putting it on paper like that, in that visual form, can sometimes just underline that, of course, a lot of energy is going into that, complaining and being upset, disappointed, resentful, whatever comes along with it. But we can't change it. So let's focus more and spend our energy on the elements within the circle where we can make some difference. So an energy audit, think about it in terms of an energy account, and think about it in terms of where that energy can be best harnessed and used in order to make a difference rather than having it dissipate and wasted. Waste of good energy.
It feels very timely, Rose. And thank you so much for joining me on People Soup. It's been a delight. And please do keep bringing the humanity in your work and your fuel model to more people because we need it. Thank you so much for joining me, Rose.
It's been my absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me here.
Hey, supers, that's it. My conversation with Dr. Rose Aghdami in the bag. You can find links to Rose's work, her book, How to Fuel Your Resilience, and her website in the show notes. One idea that's staying with me from our conversation is Rose's invitation to think about our energy in the same way we think about our time. We might often protect our diary, but how often do we pay the same attention to what restores us, what drains us, and where our energy is really going? As ever, thanks for listening, and thanks for sharing People Soup with others. You're helping us bring evidence-based ideas to more people. Until next time, look after yourselves, Peace Soupers, and bye for now.